All right, everybody. Hello and welcome. I just had to look over to my side to make sure that my webcam was indeed on. Welcome to the R2 2020 release webinar. My name is Carl Bergenham, and I am joined by my fellow colleagues here, Alyssa Neipel and TJ Van Tol. Say hello, everybody.
Hello.
All right. Well, we have a jam-packed day today, so I'm going to go ahead and get things started. Just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, everything that we're covering today is going to be available in the What's New for Kendo UI overview page. So this just happens to be a screenshot that shows up jQuery, but as you can see, we also mentioned Angular, React, and Vue. So everything that we cover today will be available in that link. Additionally, for those of you that probably are already asking, because I see some questions pop up in the little chat interface over on the right-hand side, this webinar is recorded and is being recorded as we speak. So what we will see on our YouTube channel is shortly after this will be an uploaded version of this webinar. So you can find that on Kendo UI. If you're not already a subscriber, you should be. We not only release our webinars on the Kendo UI channel on YouTube, but also any other webinars that we do or any of the videos that we put together from a perspective of getting started or whatever it might be. So you can find that over at youtube.com/KendoUI the best TV channel out there for folks. Now, just some quick highlights for R2 2020. I won't spend too much time here just because we have a jam-packed day today, but you can see that we have a ton of new features for Angular, a ton of new features on React. We have new components on the jQuery side and some new big features, as well as new native Vue components. So what we'll be doing today is stepping through each one of these technologies and covering exactly what is new within Angular, React, jQuery, and Vue, and in that order. This is kind of the agenda that we have for today. So we'll start with Kendo UI for Angular, then jump into Kendo React, then Kendo UI for jQuery, and then wrap up with Kendo UI for Vue. So with that being said, I have spoken enough for this initial part of the webinar, and I will go ahead and kick things off to my lovely colleague, Alyssa, who will start covering what is new in Kendo UI for Angular. So let me just go ahead and pass over the presenter view to you, Alyssa, and you should be good to go.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you are. So yes, you can find, like Carl said, us at Kendo UI on the Twitters. And my name, again, is Alyssa Neipel. I'm the Angular developer advocate for Kendo UI, and my DM is always open. So if you have questions about Kendo UI, Angular, or just want to chat, hit me up on the Twitters. And of course, as always, hashtag #HeyKendoUI to get your tweet involved in today's stream. So I wanted to mention before I dove into our awesome R2 features that if you didn't know, I'm a weekly panelist on 3 Angular podcasts. So if you're wondering what's going on in the Angular community and you want to stay up with the latest and greatest, check out either Angular Air, which is video and audio, or Adventures in Angular and the Angular Show, which are both audio only. So. But yes, if you haven't noticed, darlings, we have a brand new look and feel, and even our Ninja and Kendoka have been updated as well. So check that out. You should be noticing it throughout today's webinar as we continue through. And I, of course, had to mention that me, TJ, Carl, the rest of the advocate team, we are all the time on our Twitch channel. We will be talking about Kendo and other progress technologies, as well as just things that are going on in the web today, and keeping up with keeping up with the times. So please check out our twitch.tv/codeit.live. We're on weekly and we have a really good time. So yes, me and TJ were actually talking about this as I was prepping the demo. I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I've told the world yet, but we have a VS Code extension for Kendo UI to help out whenever you're trying to throw in our components. So definitely suggest you check it out if you are into VS Code. It is definitely worth downloading. And as Carl did mention, if you miss something or you want to go and drill down into more details on either a component component or a feature that was mentioned today, check out our blog post on it. This one specifically, this link is for what's new in Kendo UI for Angular components. But without further ado, let us dive into the highlights for R2 for Angular Kendo UI. So as seen before, there are a million new components. A million, yes, I exaggerate. And we also have new features that were added to existing components. So with the time that remains for my chunk, I think I have 20 more minutes. I'm going to walk through these and try to get to a demo as well. Unlike usual, I'm actually going to flip-flop it. So today we are going to walk through features first and then new components. And the first feature that I wanted to mention is our form guide. And so I actually want to pull up our form guide, but basically our form guide is a dedicated resource for building the best possible user experience. So it doesn't matter what UI components you are using. Of course, ours are using our UI components, but if I go on over to our docs, cool. So we are looking at the guideline forms doc here. And I really love these examples. They're basically showing how you can put together forms the best way possible for users. And one of the best parts, in my opinion, is that you can go either open in Stack Blitz, view the source right here, and check out exactly what's done. Basically how these components are put together. And honestly, it's not just about looks as well. I know it can be about accessibility and building out the best possible form for users. So check this out. As you can see, we go over accessibility, globalization, form support, and advanced forms. So really, really excited about this. I'm going to head back into our slides.
Yeah, and that's just doing that, everybody is building forms, right? I think every app has some sort of form. It might not be a super big and advanced form, but certainly forms, right? And even for myself, I've been building forms, throughout my entire web development career, and I still picked up some things from watching and reading through these form guidelines. So I definitely recommend it for anybody just to see some best practices, not just around, what type of components to use for certain different types of data, right? But just how to best structure it, how to break it down, maybe even, categorize
I think that's the most valuable part is like, how do you integrate all, because you have such a wide range of components available to you and, inside and outside of Kendo UI. And so how do you integrate those together and best use those together? So I love that we have these live examples in the docs now of here are some really good forms to look at and reference. So.
Or steal, just take the code.
Someone would just say steal or steal.
It's there.
I've done that. Okay, so we are seeing my slides. Yes, maybe.
Yes.
Awesome. So that covered the form guide. Now we're going to dive into the list of features on our right. The first being the TreeList RTM release with additional features. So the last release, we actually talked about the tree list because it was in beta. However, this release, it is out, it is public, it is good to go. And as a part of this RTM, we have included virtualization for virtual scrolling, selection, keyboard navigation, and accessibility compliance. So yes, like I said before, we did mention it in R2 and it was officially released now, we mentioned it in R1, but it's officially released now in R2. And it has lots of awesome features. So check out the tree list if you have not yet, because it just got an upgrade. The tree view, which is often responsible for loading thousands of nodes all at once, right? It can get a bit hefty on the browser, as you can imagine. So to assist with scenarios like this, we've actually added the load more button into the tree view. So I'm going to go and open and let me know when you see the Stack Blitz so that I am not talking about something that you cannot actually see.
We got it.
It is up. Yep.
Perfect. So yes, this is the Stack Blitz that's showing off the Kendo UI tree view. And the tree view, of course, as you would imagine, it just has all of these nodes of data that are nested, and you can load more and just continually click load more to pull in more that's underneath that particular branch. So absolutely love, love, love that feature. And it is live and ready to go. And I'm trying to find. So that will reduce the load on the browser while also still offering a way to view all of the data. So you can apply it with Kendo Tree View Load More directive and specify the desired initial page size. So check it out. The next feature is on the grid. We have persist. We persist, expand, and collapse state of detail rows. And you should see the GIF at the bottom of the screen doing so. So with this release, you now have this persistent state. And so as things are nested in the hierarchy, you can still expand and collapse, and they're going to stay that way, which is awesome, awesome. And Carl, let me know if there's any questions on these components. I think it's always funny because we'll get to the next technology, and then Angular questions will come up. So
yeah, exactly. I'm paying attention to it.
Okay. Feel free to ask your Angular questions now, but we will answer them later if you ask them later. So
correct. Yeah. We'll continue to pay attention to the questions. And again, those are over on the right-hand side, or at hashtag #HeyKendoUI on Twitter as well. We'll try to pull in some of that.
We'll find those out.
But yeah, no, you're good to go, Alyssa.
Awesome. So the next feature was added to the upload component. It was updated styling. So I'll pull up some screenshots. This includes updates to the look and feel, like these file icons that you can see that correspond to the type of selected file that you want to upload. And there were also some other UI changes that kind of help out with the whole user experience for the upload component. So check it out. It got beautified this round.
Carl, do we have that for React? That looks really good. I'm kind of jealous.
Yeah, is it? Is it in there for React, Carl?
Yeah, so the design should, on the React side, should follow similar
Okay.
designs to what we have here. Yeah, so it's more just a unification of our designs across all different themes and libraries.
Okay,
Cool.
Very cool. The next one is Conversational UI. Today, actually, this very moment as we speak, is getting support for Dialogflow v2 API. So if you haven't heard of Dialogflow, it's a very popular backend for chatbots, and they've released their official v2 version. And Conversational UI will fully support it today. And so if you haven't seen our Conversational UI component, it is a chat. And yes, as we said, the PR is being merged as we speak. So our demos should fully represent the v2 version of the Dialogflow API. So that covers. I'm hearing some noise, chatter from somebody's mic, background noise, just so you guys know. So yes, that covers all of our new features and our form guide, which I definitely recommend checking out. And it should be right in time for a poll before we hit up our new components that I'm making you wait for. Wait for it. So do we have our poll ready to go? Awesome. Yes. So how do you plan to use Kendo UI for Angular in 2020? Please let us know. So in a public facing application, in an internal application, in a personal project to learn as a reference, or I'm not planning to use it. I'd love to hear from you guys right now if you could answer our quick poll.
One or more. I mean, you could be using Kendo UI for Angular for a little bit of everything too.
That's cheating, TJ. Awesome. Answers are coming in. Lots of in a public facing application.
It's neck and neck,
as
though,
well
with
as
internal.
Yeah. 23% are not planning to use it. You wound me. You wound me.
We do have a bunch of other technologies that we're covering today.
Listen, if it's not Angular, you wound me.
They're probably just the React people that showed up for the main show later. You know, that's...
Listen, it gets a bit spicy between TJ and I. And there are the answers.
To make sure that we keep it civil.
Yeah.
Internal would be a good peacekeeper. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Internal apps 1, closely followed by public-facing applications. So very, very cool. So without further ado, the very first new component we're going to be talking about is the stepper. So, of course, it helps you divide your content into logical steps. So whether it's forms or other types of page flow, it's basically this wizard-like workflow that has this linear step validation as you go. So yes, the stepper component, check it out. It's underneath the layout in our docs if you're looking for it. The next one is our external drop zone to drag and drop files, as you can imagine, from their file system to a dedicated user interface. To link to the external drop zone to the upload, you need to provide matching IDs to the zone ID options of the drop zone and the upload. But you can read through exactly how to do that step by step in our docs. So it's underneath uploads. Check out the external drop zone today.
And by the way, this is also available as a directive. So if you want to have the functionality of being able to drag and drop a file onto another UI element within your application, but you don't want the styling that we provide out of the box, you can apply that to a generic HTML element, essentially, and using the directive, and then it can still have a file drag from a file system and dropped onto the page.
Nice. That's awesome. So check out the external drop zone today. Sorry if I'm rushing. I want to save a little bit of time for my demo, a wee bit. The next one is the pager component that enables splitting up a set of data into pages, as you can imagine, with flexitive, that's a word, with flexible and intuitive UI, AKA flexitive.
Hashtag flexitive.
Right. So here is a GIF of that working. So essentially, it's just chunking your content, but it's built in Pager. It looks super slick, and it's so much easier than building it out yourself. Oh my goodness. It's a nightmare to build something that is just works out of the box. So check out our Pager component. And the next one, our label. You might be thinking to yourself, what are you talking about? I have used a Kendo UI label before. So this is, instead of just having a directive, we've now put it in its own components. So Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can still use it as a directive, yes?
Correct. Yeah. So this just falls in line with as we were creating the form guidelines, we realized there's some additional features we could provide, even for something as simple, let's say, as a label. So we decided, hey, beyond the directive, we need to be able to ensure that our components can handle all of the scenarios that we recommend, and that's why we created this as a new component. So whichever one works for you, but this comes with a couple of additional features that you could use, like, for example, having an optional label. It comes out of the box with using the component over the directive.
Very cool. Yeah. So check out our new label component. I know we still have the directive, but it kind of goes hand in hand. And it, I have it in a larger form here, so you can check it out. But yes, no longer just a directive. And I think the next one, yes, actually utilizes it. So the last one that we're going to talk about, and that I actually have in our demo, is our form field that enables you to group and provide configurable behavior for form-related content, like your inputs, your labels, hint, and error messages. And so in this GIF, you see on the screen, we have the label component, we have the input component, and then, of course, the hint and error that's happening as the user interacts with the input. So yes, underneath our inputs, check out our new form field component. Yes, the hint and error messages can be displayed by adding the hint component and the error component. So I want to hop off of So you should be seeing, once it finally loads, the stack blitz of the tour of heroes. And we have 4 minutes, so I'm going to make it lightning fast.
Yeah, we see it. So let's do it.
Awesome. So the tour of heroes, if you are new to Angular and do not know, it's this application created by, I think, John Papa and maybe Dan Wallin, but basically it's inside the Angular docs, and it's just a demo app of displaying how do you use Angular components, how do you use services, how do you wire up a demo Angular application. And for a really long time, it was in the beginner's guide of just getting started with Angular. This should be really familiar with you if you have seen the Angular docs or hung out with Angular peeps for a while. And so I took the tour of heroes, cloned it down, which it's, again, it's in the Angular docs, it's on GitHub, and it's on StackBlitz. So I cloned it down, and my goal for like this year is to slowly start adding in Kendo UI components to essentially beautify the tour of heroes, because she ugly. Yeah. It could use a little help. And so there you'll already notice a few differences. A, that I have replaced all the heroes with My Little Pony characters. You're welcome. B, that if we jump over, you should see that basically the inputs and the buttons look just a little bit more polished. So I didn't have a ton of time to go in and replace all the components, but we will. So yes, let's actually jump over to the code, the VS Code, to save the day. Okay, so here inside our hero search component, you can see I commented out basically the label and the input that was there previously, and I have replaced it with the new form field that has a label and input. But on the search, I was like, okay, that's cool for grouping, but one of the really big features of the form field is like this ability to have a hint and error message. And for the life of me, I was like, what's an error message for a search bar? Because even if you search for like numbers or symbols, like that could potentially be in like a hero name or a My Little Pony name. And so I went and found another one, another input, and I was like, this is a better use case for it. So if I go back over to, I'm actually going to get rid of this desktop because she's bothering me. Okay, so if we go back over to our localhost 4200, on the heroes page, this is actually where you can see the list of heroes, which you might be like, hey, you changed the styles. I did wrap this so that we could see it a little better. But basically, as you type in a new hero name, you have a hint here. And then if you're like, oh, wow, a name is required to create a new hero, right? It seems pretty helpful. And then as you add, you can go down and see that it's added. So here, of course, is the form fields, the label, the input, the hint, and the error that I created. So a note here, our docs right now for a lot of the new forms, like guideline demos, and for the form filled, they use reactive forms for their examples. So in the docs, if you hook this in and you're not using reactive forms, you might actually get an error, and I'm going to show it. I'm just going to show it because it was driving me up the wall. I was like, what am I doing wrong? And so I think it's on console. Yeah, there it is. Uncaught, the Kendo form field component should contain only one ng controller. And so essentially what's happening here is it either wants you to have like reactive forms and define like the form group and the control that's on the input, or you can solve it if you just have like normal plain Jane like forms. You can have your ng model that's hooked up to, for this example, name, which of course I just plop adopted, gave it string. It's used throughout the rest of it. And that is where We go back over to heroes, our error is gone and our form field is working as expected with our hint and our error. So we will, I was talking to the devs yesterday, they are updating the docs so that it has both types of form examples. But for right now, if you're a little confused at why everything is reactive, we just got those out first in our documentation. So yes, this is on GitHub under, my name's Alyssa Michelle. It's not gorgeous right now, but I'm going to start slowly replacing all the components, and we're going to get the Tour of Heroes looking so good with Kendo UI. So look for more updates on that front. But yeah, I think I'm ready to pass it over, and I do apologize if I ran into.
No, you are actually technically a couple minutes early. So
okay,
just a note there, we managed to see the form field in action, which I think is important, just to see what it kind of does, right? Because the description of it might not do it justice. So as you saw in Alyssa's code, right, it's not just, oh, it's a form field. Like it's a field that we have in a form, right? It's everything tied to that field. So it's the component that you're using for actually inputting the information. It's a label associated with the component. It's the hint and the error components as well, right? So everything kind of gets grouped together. So it just provides you with a nice structural way of defining, okay, this is the particular field that we're dealing with, and then how do I have all these items associated with the rights of validation and the floating label if you want that, or whatever it might be, right? Everything kind of falls in line there. So it's once you see it in action, that's really when it starts making sense.
Yeah, no, I love it. I was actually, I love our components. They're so much fun because I was like looking at, these, and I was like, should these be like chips? And so you might see if you pull down the GitHub code that I actually have like commented out where I was like playing with the Kendo UI chip component that, has existed for a while, but then you see them. So I don't know, it'll be fun if you want to make a PR and tell me which components you want me to use. I will slowly start adding in new features too. But yeah, I'm really excited about giving the Tour of Heroes a makeover. So but yeah, so should I pass it over to the TJ or is it back to Carl?
It is to TJ.
Awesome.
So thanks everybody for joining. It's time for the React portion of this and everything to cover that we've released as part of the R2 release for React Land. My name is TJ Van Tol. If you're just joining us, I am a developer advocate on the KendoReact team. And there's a number of things I want to cover today. We've only got a half hour, so I really want to dive right in. So we have form guidelines as well for React. If you were here for Alyssa's section on Angular, you saw those for Angular. We have some similar guidelines for React, so we'll show those. We'll spend the bulk of our time going over all the new components and features that we shipped as well. There's a new sample app I want to point out to you and just point it out as a reference that's available to you. And then as time allows, we'll do some Q&A at the end as well. But I want to start by looking at the form guidelines. And I have a link here, but I think it's actually easier if I just show you where to find this on the documentation. So this is the KendoReact site. This is the docs and demos. And if you go under the components list for the form, you'll see that there's this new section for React form guidelines. And really, this is, to me, just a comprehensive guide over solving any problems that you might have related to forms, including how to use all the different components that we now have, some of which are new for this release that we'll talk about in a minute, as well as problems like how you implement validation using our components, whether that's field validation or form validation, how you lay out different controls. So I'm going to refer back to this when we get into demos here momentarily, but at the moment, I just wanted to tell you that this resource is now out there. It's quite comprehensive. You can find it under the form section, again, React Form Guidelines. So the guidelines are out there, but I want to spend most of our time today talking about all the new components and features that we are shipping as part of this release. So there's so much that I struggled to put this on one slide. You'll notice that this slide does include more things than Alyssa's similar slide. Not that this is a competition, but if it was a competition, we would probably be winning on the React side of things. So there's a lot here, and there's a lot that we need to cover. You'll see that a lot of this, if you're around for Alyssa's too, you saw that there was a number of new Angular form components. There are for Angular or for React as well, a lot to support those form guidelines, like this chunk here that we'll be going over. Now, if you've seen my talks or my webinars before, you know that I like to show a lot of this in action. So I'm going to switch over to my coding environment in a minute. But before we do that, I want to run one quick poll while I'm sort of setting up my coding environment. So if we could launch this poll for KendoReact, the question we want to ask today is, how did you first hear about KendoReact? So are you either a Telerik customer? Did you find us from a search? Did you hear us from a newsletter mention, through an advertisement, or someone you know that referred you?
It sounded like you said, did you fear us? And I'm like, yes, we fear you, KendoReact.
You know, the Kendoka can be kind of scary if you see him in the full outfit.
I don't know. The rebranded one, though, it's got like very much a cute feel.
That's true.
And I should also mention, Carl and I, we can brag and make people jealous while they're answering this. Like, we've got brand new, straight off the printing press, KendoReact shirts. So
wait.
Listen, I don't think you have these for Angular quite yet, do you? So these are.
I'm not seeing you. All I see is a poll, and you're showing a shirt.
Yeah, it might be that when the poll pops up, none of our webcams are shared anymore.
So
I don't think our webcams are. So stop showing your shirt. It's not fair.
Oh. So it looks like.
So we have.
Oh no! The quick poll answers are up. Stop it.
Yeah, not quite yet. Yeah, but okay, there we go.
A lot of you are
customers. Yeah,
that's awesome.
A lot of referrals as well, so that's awesome to see as well. So thanks all for coming. And we do need to show, before I switch over to coding, I will show the shirt here, so you can see it to the side. I think the Angular ones are in the works, but
yeah. No, the Angular ones are actively in the works as we speak. Yeah.
All right. So let's switch over and do some coding now. So I've got a little sample app up here that's sort of an empty shell boilerplate app. I like the fictitious company Acme Industries, mostly because they conveniently tend to need exactly the features that we're shipping with each Kendo release, which is just, it's uncanny how that works out.
Yeah, and they're a wonderful customer.
Yeah, it's really just absolute case study for us to use. And you'll see that I had that slide with all the features, the new components and features, and I tossed them in this markdown file. And as I said, there is a lot, so I'm probably going to sort of pick and choose through this. And I've also got links out to the docs site to show you a little more comprehensive example of how each of these things work. So for example, if we start with the list view, which is the first of our new components on the list, if you want to use the new list view as part of KendoReact, basically its most basic setting is you just import the component and use it and pass it a list of data. And then if I save this, this actually won't do anything in my application. I'll just see an empty list because I also have to say how to render this item as well. And this is one thing I like about just KendoReact in general. And you'll see this theme as we go throughout a lot of the new features, is that we offer a lot of these sort of extensibility hooks where we're providing you some functionality, but we also give you this sort of hook to customize these controls to meet your needs. So in this case, I say I have a list view. This is basically my data. And for each of my data items, I'm also providing a component for how that data should actually be rendered. So what I'm doing in this case is I'm saying I'm using actually a component we shipped as part of the R1 release for KendoReact, the card component, to actually render each person in this list. And you can see with this, I really like this code just because I find it semantic and quite easy to look at, like a list view and a list of cards. And I get a pretty decent looking app here out of the box. And the list view, to switch over to the documentation, you might like that look by default, but it does provide some more advanced functionality. For example, if you wanted to add paging, so this is a UI that you see on lots of like blogs or product listings and such, where you've just got a list of data and you need to add paging. The list view easily integrates with the KendoReact pager, so you can add paging to your list of data. There's also support for endless scrolling as well. So this is if you're building the next great Twitter or Facebook clone, or you're building any sort of app that has a lot of data that you need to show in a list, you can use these APIs and also support these larger data sets through the use of endless scrolling. So definitely something to check out if you show lists of data in your app, which is a pretty common thing to do. You can check out the list view control that is new as part of this release. So that is the first of our new components. The next sort of chunk, all of these are related to the form guidelines that we looked at earlier. And so because of that, let's switch over to a really simple form that I got started for Acme, which is currently only username and password. And some of this code I have here is something that this form component that we shipped as part of our R1 release. And it provides some functionality that's kind of cool out of the box with really a minimal amount of just hand coding. So for example, I've got this form. This is coming from KendoReact, as well as these fields that are coming from KendoReact as well. And when I fill out this form with my super secure credentials and submit this, because of this little handler I have here, I can instantly get basically JSON formatted data out of this form, which is handy because if you're building large forms in React today, you might have some code that looks something like this, where you have like some epic state object, or you might have like useState, and you probably spell it correctly in your app. But you might have like 20 of these things, right? Because managing state and forms just turns into a mess really quickly. So one key feature you get just out of the box with a KendoReact form is a saner way of maintaining that state. Like you don't have to do all these on-change handlers, all this state management. You just get a simple callback in the submit, and all the data is aggregated and ready there for you. So that's sort of the step one, the basis that all of this is being built on top of. But there's a lot of new stuff that we shipped in this release to really let you customize these forms to meet whatever needs you have of the apps that you are building. So for example, you can pass in a validator for each of these. So I have a required validator. This is the function I have defined up here that basically says, if the value is an empty string, pass back that this is valid, otherwise it returns an error message. And when I submit this, you can see the submission is automatically stopped. And I also get this sort of error highlighting as well. Another thing you can do, just in the sort of this theme of customizability, is you can also take this component. So by default, I'm rendering this using the KendoReact input. But if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to customize this further, I wanted to do something a little differently than how KendoReact provides it out of the box, I can provide this pretty minimal wrapper of the input. So this is the same KendoReact input, but I added a little bit of extra functionality. So I said, okay, if this field has been touched, if the user's interacted with it, and there's a validation message, let me use one of the new KendoReact label components, the error, to show a little error message under the field. So a little simple extensibility, adding in, and I have this ability to show error messages. The same thing, the hint component is also new to KendoReact. So if I go down here and I provided a hint, and the hint could be like, so you got to type it right. This is where your username goes. I'm not a UX expert. You probably shouldn't use that hint for your apps, but you can see that you get this simple little way to these nice little building blocks for building up your forms. And if we actually go out to the form guidelines, so what I'm showing is still fairly simple, just for time's sake. We're not going to go through all 20-some examples that are out here, but these same building blocks can be built up. So for example, if you wanted field level validation on like all of these rich components that we provide in KendoReact, that's something that you can do. If you needed form level validation, that is available to you as well. So again, when you have these form needs, what you want to do is head to the KendoReact docs and demos, find these form guidelines, and that's going to walk you through finding what you need to know. And this like little table of contents is great too, because you can sort of isolate the exact scenario you have and sort of take the code that's relevant to you. So in addition to all this, we covered some of this, like some of the new labels. I have to check these off. Not super OCD, but for things like this, it's nice to just check things off the list as we go through them.
Let's just say you are.
Right. I think everybody's like some degree of OCD, right? It's just where you fall on like the spectrum of things. So in addition to this, there's also a number of new components that are related to forms as well. The first is one of my favorites, the radio button in the radio group. And because I don't know, Carl and Alyssa, have you ever tried to style the built-in browser radio buttons at all? It's like an effort.
Made the mistake of trying to do that before. Yes.
Yeah, I just build out a custom one because you can't. You just can't.
And so this is one of my favorites because it lets you just do that, but simple, right? Because so you can use the radio group individually, but it also integrates into all this other form stuff that we have with KendoReact now. So again, I have a field. This is going to be the same as our input or our username and password. And really all I have to do is say the component I want to render this with is a radio group and provide my name value pairs, essentially what the individual radio buttons should be. And if I submit this form, you'll see that it all gets formatted up for submission. So I don't have to worry about, again, any of the state management, that sort of thing. I could tie this into the validation if I wanted to. And like this gets rendered, it's going to be cross-browser friendly and still be themable and such as well, which, like I said, on your own is quite the task if you've ever went down that path before. So this is another little handy component. You'll see this mentioned throughout the form guidelines as well, the new radio button and radio group controls. So make sure to check that out. And we have so many of these today. Another one that's new for this release is the range slider. Now, the slider has been a part of KendoReact, I think now for several releases. The range slider is new. And again, I like this because it's got a fairly intuitive API. Basically, you just pass it a min, a max, where the starting value should be, and then any labels. So these labels are these things down here that you want to provide on these controls. And I think I mostly see these on shopping sites. So like price filters is probably the most common example. I can't think of any other examples, but it's super handy on like sites like Amazon where I say I want to get the price range that I'm looking for. So if you're building something like this, check out the range slider. It's a fairly, really simple way of implementing that sort of functionality. All right. So we did these two. We're making good progress. Let's see, we're 15 minutes in. I think we can do this. So we did this. The next two components are all based off of showing you progress in your applications, as you might expect. So let's go up to the top of this form and let's pretend, for example, for instance, that Acme is building something far more complex than we can feasibly do today. They're building this sign-up form that's super ambitious. It's like 6 steps. You're providing all this information. And so one thing you might want to do is show your users where they are in this process. And so there are a couple different ways you can do this with our new components. So one, the sort of easiest is just to use the new progress bar component. And for this, again, you just provide a value. The ends are presumed to be 0 and 100, although you can customize that as well. And then you can just say how far along the progress is. So in this case, 50. You can mess with this to do whatever you'd like. You can show a label if you want the user to see the actual specific number. Like if you're providing like a download progress bar and you want to show like 20%, 30%, that sort of thing, that's something you can do as well. You can set this to null. So this I actually find maybe more useful than the progress bar itself, just because it's a super handy just loading indicator. So if you have something that you just want to show the data is loading, this is like a one-liner that makes that dead simple to do. So that's something that might be nice, something you might want to try.
That's a fun little trick that I didn't know about, actually. So I just learned something on our own webinar.
It's pro tips here. It's pro tip day. You can also, if you put the word chunk in front of it and you want a chunk progress bar, essentially, as you might expect, these names are kind of intuitive. It just divides the progress bar into chunks. So you can say how many chunks between 0 and 5, and how many chunks should actually be filled out. So 3, 4, whatever. So this is just how many steps, essentially. Like this is, again, like a multi-phase thing. If you wanted to show users there's 10 things that need to be done, 8 have been completed. Another just handy one-line component that makes implementing that sort of thing super simple. Now, my favorite way of doing this, though, I saved the best one for last because I'm super clever in how I organize this, is the stepper component. Now, you might have seen this, Alyssa showed this off for Angular, but it's also new to React as well. And what I like about this is that this is probably my favorite API because I think you just sort of get the most bang for your buck with this thing. Because really all you have to do for this thing is you provide it an array of items. And these items are going to be steps in this UI that you see over here. And the other thing you have to provide is just labels and icons, and then also how many steps the user has completed. So 2, 3, whatever the case might be. And you get this UI that I think is actually quite nice, and that I see more and more in modern UIs as well. Like if you do have a multi-step form process, I see these things a lot. And there's also, if I go to the docs for this, you can also show these things. So this is under layout, stepper, and I'm going to go to the orientation demo because you can also change this thing to vertical. And I see this a lot on like tutorial sites, for example, where like on the side of the screen, they're showing how far along you are in a sequence of steps. And this component is just a super elegant API for allowing you to do that fairly easily. All right, so I showed this. Oh man, got to get this right. So we got check, check. So those are all of the new components. Obviously, I covered them kind of quickly, so make sure to check out the documentation if you want to learn more. So I got 10 minutes, and I want to cover at least a little bit about each of the new features that we shipped as well, because some of these are actually quite impressive, and there's quite a lot to them. And the scheduler is one of those. So Acme, what do you know? They happen to have a scheduler in their app. Again, just ultra convenient. And their scheduler is quite simple. And what I want to use their scheduler to do is show how you can now customize the header and footer that appear in this. So I mentioned earlier that a big theme of, well, KendoReact in general, but especially this release, is extensibility. And so if you wanted to configure the footer, what you can do now is just provide like a custom footer through a footer prop. And what you can then do is I can say my custom footer is whatever. So I could return, like, just for example, a div here and with some pizza. And actually, I think I want to do this, scheduler footer. And then if you wanted your scheduler to have pizza in the footer, there you go. Your day is made. You have now solved that important challenge. You can also, though,
as we all do,
exactly. So another thing you can do too is you get past the, VS Code is letting me down. I want props dot. Oh, I don't need the $sign. What am I doing? Alyssa, there's too much Angular still left in me. I want to type $signs when it's not necessary. I need to break myself of this habit. I'm on the better framework now.
The sass.
It might be because it's a prop and not props.
Okay. Yeah, so see, what I can do is, for example, with this hook or this extensibility API, I get past what KendoReact would have displayed anyways. So this is the normal display. And what's cool about that is that you also then have a spot where you can add your own custom stuff. So all of this is about really flexibility, right? You can take the default footer if that's what you want. You can augment it if that's what you want. You can just kill the footer if you think it's ugly and you don't need that functionality. You can do that as well. So if you're interested in this, the docs are going to go into a lot more detail than I have a chance to do today. So there's demos for both the header and the footer. And there's one example I like here too, because for this example, the footer has a dropdown that can change essentially the length of each slot in here. So if you wanted to give the users the chance to customize something like that, maybe you wanted them to have the ability to highlight different things in the scheduler, that's now something you have sort of an easy API for implementing that sort of thing. So that's pretty powerful for those of you using the scheduler. I know that one was pretty highly requested, so make sure to check that out. Speaking of sort of these extensibility hooks, the drawer has one as well. So if you missed it, the last KendoReact webinar R1 release, we released a new drawer component, and that's actually what I've been using here. And if I go in here and look at the drawer, by default, you actually get this UI by default. So I have no code to make this sort of thing happen, which I think is actually kind of cool in a way, right? I don't have to, it's sort of the best thing of using some of these UI components is you sort of offload the responsibility for this. But we also realize that sometimes in real world apps, you do need control. So that's the idea behind some of these APIs. So one thing you can do is for the item now, this prop is brand new. I can say like custom drawer item. And then in my code, I'll go up here and put that in. And essentially it just gives you, you'll see that this is similar to the scheduler and some of these other things that we've looked at, where you have the ability to just completely change up the control of the display. And in this case, I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm just spitting out the text, but obviously you could build up your own DOM, your own styling here, while still letting KendoReact control sort of the hard parts, like when this thing shows and the animation and all of that sort of thing as well. So that is take that out for now. That is the drawer. All right, I think we're gonna make it. We got two more to cover. The next one is the
got it.
The next one is the grid, and there is a new checkbox filter. So this one I'm just going to show on the documentation. So if you want to find this, we've got the grid section of the docs. This is under columns and column menu. And column menus are not new to the KendoReact grid, but these checkbox filters are. And this is one of those things that as a user, I can totally see the value of this. So if I'm looking at this grid and pretend there's thousands of things in here, and I quickly want to see, well, let me show all of these where, say, discontinued is true. It's just a really sort of simple UI element you now have to give users a quick way of filtering this data. And if you look in here, I can find it. This is, our APIs we at least try to make them pretty consistent. You'll see that there's a column menu sort of hook where you pass a component. So you pass a column menu. And the real magic happens here. This is the bit that's new, this grid column menu checkbox filter. So again, if you're interested in this and implementing this, check the grid and then the column section and this multi-column page for details on that.
So there's a question. I don't know if you boys know the answer. Is there a plan for adding show hide to column menu?
That's a good question. Like I'm guessing on like if you wanted the column itself to completely go away.
Yeah, we actually should have a demo on that, I believe. It's escaping me off the top of my head, but somewhere in this column menu area, I believe there's a demo that showcases that. It essentially works with a custom column menu that just goes through the column collection and provides a quick and easy way to show or hide something, right? So it lists it.
Oh, you're saying that's like already possible?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It should be. It might be that it's just a couple of additional lines of code, but it's very similar to what you see here, right? Where we had a specific type to help out with that. You'll be able to find something similar with the showing and hiding of columns. The reason that we expose this new filtering mechanism as a way to offer filtering is just that data list, if we just have true or false, that's fairly easy, right? Those are two different options we can choose from. But if we started going into the product name where we might have tens, 20, hundreds, and these are a lot, right? But that needs to be populated somehow. So rather than just assuming based off of the data that the grid gets, especially if it's data coming from a server where you might not know the full data collection, you have the ability to populate that just with the unique values, and then the grid will automatically work with applying the filter down to everything within that list. So that's why you see that it's a similar thing on the show and hide columns, because there might even be some columns that you don't want users to be able to hide. So that it gives you the flexibility of just being able to structure that yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I didn't know that was already a thing. Cool.
And the last on our list is the tree list. So I want to make sure to show this because this is actually the component that we updated the most as part of this release. And there are a number of new features for this. So you'll find this under the tree list section in the documentation. The one thing is new is virtual scrolling for rows. We actually had column virtualization before, and you can now do row virtualization as well. So if you are the sort of person that you have these massive data sets for your tree list, and we have a number of new features to help support that. Virtualization is one of them. Another one is paging. So just above this, there's a demo that can help you out implementing this. But if you have a tree list and you have so much data that your users need paging, we now implement or integrate with the KendoReact pager functionality so that you can add those to your tree list as well. There is drag and drop. This one actually, I could sort of see some pretty fun things you might be able to do with this. So if you have some hierarchical, which is a hard word to say, data, and you want your users to be able to sort of reorder these things and keep the hierarchy, this is actually kind of cool. And to show this, what I'm going to do is there's a developer advocate in here, and I am going to promote them all the way up to be under the CEO. So Amos just got a pretty good promotion. He just moved up 3 levels. But anytime you need to sort of give your users a way of sorting that sort of thing, it's kind of a cool thing to do. There are aggregates, and I've got like 2 minutes, so I'm going to blaze through this. Aggregates, basically just stuff on the bottom of the screen. You can export to PDF and Excel now from TreeList. That's actually some of my favorite pieces of functionality because I've never like researched how that's actually done. So to me, it's just complete black magic. But anytime you need to do that, it's super useful. That's also in here. So some of these exports as well. So make sure to check that out. Definitely see some of the new stuff we've shipped as part of the tree list. And then to just sort of wrap things up, as that was our demo, I know I mentioned that there is a new coffee warehouse sample app. So I want to show you this if you just need to, if you want to screenshot some of these URLs or check them out. It's a new demo that we have available showing a number of our components in action. And a big focus of this demo was also to show a number of our components working together. So things like the charts working together with date range pickers, their schedulers, some of the new form controls are in there. So this is just another one that's good to bookmark and to keep available if you need it. And I think we're just about out of time. For hello to all the jQuery people showing up. We're just about to start that, but I know we do have one last poll that we want to show for KendoReact. So if we could toss that up. And again, then after this poll, we'll move on to transition over to the jQuery stuff. So do we have the poll up?
It is up, yes.
We do.
Okay.
So the poll, I can read it since I have it in front of me here, is how do you plan to use KendoReact in 2020? And this is a please select all that apply. So this is similar if you've been in the other sessions so far, we asked a very similar question, but is it in a public facing app, an internal application, a personal project, or more just to learn or as a reference, or I'm not planning to use it? And if you're a jQuery person just joining, that might be your option. But for those of you that are sitting in here, just, yeah, those are your options. If a couple of apply, then you can just check those off. So we'll leave this up here for a little bit longer.
Looks like, man, public facing versus internal apps. It was the same thing with Angular. It's just sort of a neck and neck.
I'm always surprised by how many people still say like to learn as a reference. It's really interesting.
For sure. But it's kind of cool because you can build some powerful stuff pretty quickly. And it looks like the results, public facing one, just edging out internal apps. But it's cool to see some variety. So just to wrap up the KendoReact section, hopefully you found it's interesting. If you have any other questions, I'm going to pop over and look at the questions. And again, we have team members on the line. I have some links here for where you can learn some additional stuff. But I think that's it for React. So Carl, do you want to take control here and we can get started with the jQuery stuff?
Yeah, I will. And let me, I'm working with multiple screens here and my phone to check like any Twitter questions. So if anybody ever sees me looking this way or down a little bit, it's multiple screens that I'm dealing with here. But
it's like one of the movies where like you have all the screens around and you like feel like you're sort of in mission control sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't have, the uniform screens with like everything is the same size and it looks nice and cool. It's more like, oh, one monitor here, a bigger monitor here, a tiny phone screen over here, right?
Yeah.
All right. So we should see everything transition over now in my slide deck over to Kendo UI for jQuery.
Looks good.
And perfect. All right. So welcome everybody to the jQuery portion of this. And you might have already noticed within all the webcam areas that you see within the GoToWebinar interface, you also see the agenda. So we have the jQuery piece now, and then we'll cover Vue in about half an hour. So for those of you that are joining for Vue, you are a little bit early, but that's fine. We have so many good things to cover on the jQuery side. So in Kendo UI for jQuery, we have a lot of new components and a lot of features actually that I've just set updates, and we'll dive into what that is specifically as we cover each one of these. But what I'll do is I'll step through these and just cover them in slide form first, and then jump over into some live demos where we can see how each one of these components looks and feels and behaves live on a website. But to get things started, let's talk about the form component. So this is a lot of fun, right? Because we've already talked about forms on the Angular side and on the React side. But on the jQuery side, we haven't yet really had a form component. Yes, we've had input elements that, of course, can be used in a form, and we have a validation framework. But we don't necessarily have a standalone form component until today. So this form component is specifically there to help set up an actual model around your form and be able to create all these different input elements with labels and hints and errors and all that good stuff. So you'll see the forms is a very common thing across all flavors of Kendo UI with this release, and jQuery is certainly no exception. Now, we also have a stepper component. So this is something that we've seen in the other flavors as well. So the stepper allows you to break down anything within your application into steps, whether this is maybe a longer form or maybe something like we see here. It could be, for example, submitting your CV or resume to a website, right? And what's very neat is you see in the GIF, not only do we have an animation of you even potentially skipping a step, right, and going straight through from attachments to submit, but we also have stylings around valid or invalid steps, and future steps are to come, and you can see the review is kind of grayed out a little bit. So you have a lot of different styles that you can work with within the stepper beyond just is it completed or is it not completed. And of course, every step is completely customized for the content that's in there, so it can be anything. It doesn't have to be form related. It is completely driven by you for what you want to have each step to be. Now, the tile layout component is a very fun and new component. And just this image doesn't necessarily do it justice, but the idea of the tile layout component is that you have these tiles, and each one of these can be resized, it can be dragged around, so it gives you the ability to define a column and grid structure for these different tiles and say this particular tile takes up 1 column and 1 row unit, or maybe it's 2 and 2, right, depending on which tile you're looking at here. And then from there, you can rearrange these tiles to fit whatever your end user might want. So if you, for example, as a developer, you say, hey, these are all the default items that we want to lay out in a default way, then the user can go through and customize just how they want this to look and feel on their side, if in case there's anything that's a little bit different that they want to highlight. They might want the downloads chart to be a little bit smaller and look at the total streams number instead, for example. But we'll see more about that when I jump over into the demos. Now, before I cover the schedule updates, we also have a poll here on the jQuery side, and I wanted to get to this kind of right in the beginning, so we'll see when that pops up for everybody. I cannot see the poll right now, so let me see if maybe I can.
It's up, and it says, how do you plan to use Kendo UI for jQuery in 2020?
Perfect. All right. So yeah, so we have in a public-facing application, in an internal application, a personal project, to learn or as a reference, or I'm not planning to use it. So if you joined right at the end of TJ's section here, this might be the second time you answer this, but this is helping us, specifically just around how folks are using the Kendo UI for jQuery components today.
And it's sort of interesting to see the previous two are neck and neck between internal and public facing, and it's mostly the same for jQuery, but public facing is pulling ahead here a little bit.
Yeah, and that is one of my favorite things as a citizen of the web, right? To navigate through and see your components pop up on applications that you're using, or you just stumble upon it actually live. And now, of course, having an intimate knowledge of our components, even if somebody's customized them quite a bit, I can oftentimes say, oh, they're using Kendo UI for jQuery here, or Angular, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's funny how you get to know, like, you spend enough time with them and you can pinpoint them exactly, like, hey, I know what that is.
Yep. And even for customized ones, all you have to do is then jump into the source code and then kind of check it out, right? And then you're off to the races there to see what's actually being used, if it's Angular or React or whatever it might be. But yeah, so public facing just inched out the internal applications, but that's fun to see, of course. And if anybody wants to let us know how you're using Kendo UI for jQuery in a public-facing website, you can feel free to type that in the chat, and we'll definitely check it out after the webinar for sure. But all right, so let's talk a little bit about beyond the new components. And there is actually one more new component that I will cover. I just don't have it in the list here. But let's jump into the updates to some of our other components. So one big thing that we came out with this particular release is virtualization within the scheduler. So what you can see here, and the GIF kind of ends right as you get to the next level, but in scenarios where you have a lot of events displayed in a day, and that might not just be from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or whatever it is, right, throughout a workday. It could be that in this particular case, you've grouped it by different individuals and maybe even by different groups on top of that, right? So, different rooms. So you have rooms and then individuals within those rooms and what their schedule looks like. So your day can actually be fairly long. And this is where virtualization comes into play. So you can continue to kind of scroll through larger than average display of information within the scheduler. So just like with the grid, when you have a lot of data, just like anything else when you have a lot of data, it just allows you to easily and quickly scroll through without having that performance hit of loading all the information all at once.
That's nice because I mean, I know I use my Outlook calendar that way where I'll just sometimes scroll through months at a time looking for something. So
yeah, it definitely helps when you have that singular day view that then continues. So it's not just in the single day, but you're essentially highlighting one day at a time as you're scrolling through. There can be a lot of data loaded in there, not especially if your calendar is absolutely booked, but also not just for you, right? But if you think about like meeting rooms, some people have created applications with their schedule to represent meeting rooms. That then becomes even more of a pain to scroll through that large set of data until you have virtualization. Another thing that's kind of related, actually, is that we implemented a built-in search text box that allows you to filter down events within the scheduler. So if you have a lot of events and people are just trying to find that particular event or those events or events related to whatever they're typing in, this little search text box that appears at the top of the toolbar here for the scheduler just allows you to quickly type something in and filter down events. And that, of course, can be customized. So you can define just how you're filtering and specifically what values you're looking to filter on and everything like that. So it's a lot of customization that can be done there from that UI element being added. And then we have some data source updates, and this I don't have any great screenshots for, but I will have some demos of that. But the biggest thing to the data source is that we have implemented remote / server-side grouping as a part of the data source. So this means that we now have enabled server-side grouping for data-bound components, because if you're not familiar with how things work on the jQuery side of things, I should say every single component that is data-bound in some capacity generally deals with the data source, because that helps with defining a model that these components can deal with for editing, for binding, and defining what fields to work with. It also has a lot of built-in functionality around how to reach out to your RESTful endpoints and CRUD operations that you need to do, etc. So one thing that's been missing is being able to ship information to the server to allow you to do grouping of data on the server. Now, where this can come into play is, for example, server-side grouping in the grid. So this allows you to enable features like if you have grouping enabled within the grid and you have a ton of data within individual groups, you can actually load data from the server as you're expanding a group, as opposed to needing to have all that data loaded on the client at once. So this is kind of the specific scenario that this helps, but that can be a huge help depending on how you've implemented grouping or what your data looks like within your grids today, for example. So we'll see what that looks like in a demo in a minute or two. We also updated some validator items. So specifically, the validator has allowed jQuery developers to deal with validation, right? So it can quickly showcase a summary of validation errors or just display validation in general. And then if you've used the Kendo UI MVVM framework, for those of you that have been using Kendo UI for jQuery for quite some time, you might have been involved in the MVVM days, right, with Knockout, and I would even throw in Backbone in there, right, those kind of libraries. So Kendo UI has its own version of that. So the validator definitely helps out with creating out validation around these kind of spot type of applications. But now, thanks to the form component, we needed to also update and add in more features and functionality based on the best practices we have around building forms, like you saw on the React and the Angular side with the form guidelines. So with that knowledge, we updated the validator as well to be able to just ensure that we can cover any and all validation scenarios that we need with the form component. And that, of course, means you can take advantage of that as a standalone component as well. And then the last feature that we introduced is kind of a big one, if you ask me, but it's the ability to do floating labels on a lot of our inputs. It's not universal across every single input component within Kendo UI for jQuery today. We are working on just covering everything that we can. But the nice thing is that within the numeric text box or the new text box component, which we'll be able to see, floating labels can now be added no matter which theme you're using on the Kendo UI for jQuery side. So floating labels, very popular in the material design side of things, right? So I saw some questions pop through as we were talking about floating labels or showing floating labels in both the Angular and the React section. And while, yes, that is a part of material design, let me not kick over to Kendo UI for review, but let me instead pop open the demos. There we go. I got a little bit excited and ahead of myself there. But yeah, the floating labels, they're transcendent material design. Everybody wants floating labels now. So you'll see that in a lot of the Kendo UI input components, starting with the R3 release. R2 release. R3, well, I'm already thinking ahead on what we're releasing there.
It's also another one that's really hard to make yourself because, yes, like especially from like an accessibility standpoint, like making sure that there's actually a label there and not just some voodoo you're doing, and then positioning across screen sizes, and
there's I think the accessibility thing ends up being a sneaky thing that not too many people think about, but then once they realize they need to implement that, to have the functionality and still make it accessible is a huge effort, I think. I barely was able to figure out how to do floating labels on my own just for fun, and that definitely did not have anything to do with accessibility too. So I was
gonna say it's hard to get the accessibility right if your labels are not floating. So
yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's very true. But everything comes baked in with our components, of course, which is lovely to see. But let's use some of our online demos here to cover. I have about 15 minutes or so left, so that gives me some time here to go through and step through the demos. But as we can see here, this is the form component for Kendo UI for jQuery. So very similar to actually it's probably the exact same screenshot that I used here. But if we scroll down a little bit into the definition, then we can kind of see what the component looks like. And let me zoom in just a little bit here so you can see the text a little bit easier. So what we have here, right, is the Kendo form. And in this particular case, we just use a quick jQuery selector to be able to grab this form element, right? So you're still using an HTML form, but what we're then doing is injecting all the different input components that you might want for each individual field. So in this particular case, we already, for example, have some form data that we might want to pre-fill in. So if we look here, right, so we have the username, email, password, birth, and agree, and we have some data. If I scroll up, I believe, yeah, we have Johnny, we have John Doe, we have this. So you can leave that empty if you want to, of course, but that also means you can very easily extract that information from the component. And then within the items collection, this is where we define specifically what fields that we want to have available. We tag in a label in there and validation as well. And you can even see here, right, that we can add a hint all within one single field. So for those of you that have been through the entire webinar so far, this is very similar to the form fields that you saw on the Angular and the React side. So it's just super helpful to not just define, okay, this is the particular field that I'm binding to, or this is the data item that I want to deal with, but then being able to associate labels, hints, errors, validation messages beyond just if you wanted to set this up and have a custom message, you of course could. So it just makes organizing things a lot easier. So you don't just have to define, hey, here's my input, and then, oh, here's a label that's associated with this input. Oh, here's a validation step that I want to do that's associated with this, right? And kind of have to define it once and then have it be tagged in from all these different areas. Now it's all just in one single item within this items collection, which makes it a lot easier. You can even see that beyond required, we have things like email. So we have some built-in pieces to the validation framework that just allows you to very quickly handle any and all validation on the jQuery side of things. And of course, exposing all the appropriate events that you might need if you want to jump in and do something specifically before the submit or on the submit, or as we're clearing the elements or whatever it might be. All right, so then tagging in with the validation framework, just what we've done is very similar to what you might have seen on the form side of things, right? This specifically is built to help with the form component, but you just have the ability now to have beyond just the inline styles, right? We also have the summary that you can customize and tweak and provide your own template for. So not too many people know specifically, this happens to be under the form component validation, but just using the validator framework under the hood. And this is a standalone component that you could use outside of the form component if you wanted to as well, just to help with doing validation on the client, or to be able to at least display validation messages a little bit easier. Now, if we jump over to the stepper component, we can see now myself clicking around here and just how the component behaves as we're clicking. We can even see that education here is something that has an exclamation point, and so that might be something that we might want to look into. So if I look into the code right now, this happens to be very simple, right? Where we just have steps. Each one has a label and an icon, but we can set up things like, for example, error or selected if we want to be able to have when the page initially loads that it's up to a certain point, or enabled. In this case, we can disable certain steps. And this just happens from the configuration option of a stepper that we have that has nothing tied to it. But if you want to start taking control over certain aspects of the step, right, you want to be able to move between them. You may want to, for example, manually showcase that there's an error if something was invalid in that particular step, but you're still letting users move between steps. There's a lot of flexibility for what the component can offer that just because these are essentially the, I almost said stepping stones, which is a little bit too much of a pun, right?
Yeah, you need to get, that should be an API in here, like.
Yeah, yeah, stepping stone, yeah.
Yeah.
I know. We'll come up with maybe it will be a good April Fool's joke, the pun API for all of our components that we spend a release on working on. But yeah, so there's a lot of different things you can do within the stepper component just out of the box, and of course it all drives into how do you want to be able to display the stepper, and how do you want your users to interact with it? So we have a full rundown of the API that you can use to move even programmatically between steps if you wanted to, or update the state, like for example, error, true or false, right? As people are navigating through and you're doing some other logic.
There's one related question, Carl, that I think factors into those APIs. Somebody was asking, can you tie like the stepper and form validation together? Probably saying like, don't move on to the next step until this form is valid.
Yeah, so there's definitely some things you can do there, but it is a little bit more of a manual wiring up. What I can actually share on this webinar as that question popped up is this is kind of falls in line with more of a wizard component, which is actually something that we are actively working on as we speak. So we needed to lay the groundwork by having the stepper component and the form component, and now that they're both here, we will be able to introduce the wizard component with Kendo UI for jQuery. So that just is not a part of R2.
Is that an R3 maybe?
We're actually going to release it a little bit earlier than R3, but you know, for the sake of everybody on the webinar, it will definitely be available by R3 2020.
First.
Yeah, exactly. It's hot news, right? So you can run off and tweet about it. You can run to the presses, right? Print it out in the New York Times. Yeah, it's hot and fresh out of the oven. But today, if you wanted to be able to take the stepper component and then the form component, you can definitely prevent navigation as well. So once you find that something is invalid, right? You can just requires a little bit more manual wiring up today, but it is certainly possible. All right. Now the tile layout component, this is a fun one to be able to demo because it does demo really well. So here we kind of see a KPI dashboard, right? It's actually, now that I'm zoomed in, quite a lot of scrolling needs to happen. So maybe if I zoom out a little bit. And in this particular case, I can take this conversion channel KPI, drag it up over here, and automatically, or automagically, we can say, the component tries to address what available real estate it has and tries to move some of the other KPIs around. So for example, maybe it makes a little bit more sense to move the bounce rate up here, but if I try to come and ruin that by dragging visitors up here, we can again see how the component has built-in logic for trying to rearrange everything based on the available real estate. So maybe it currently can move over here. Oh, it doesn't want to. What? So the demo guys, of course, now I'm just messing with the component, and for some reason that doesn't want to move over. But the idea is, right, that if your users, for example, say, no, this isn't the default layout that I want to be able to see things a little bit differently, you can now drag these around. So each tile, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is really slick, and I see this sort of UI all the time. Like I was just in Twitch the other day, they have something like this in their back end where you sort of build this like little dashboard, and I totally did this. I wanted different things in different spots, right? But I have no idea how I'd implement this on my own. Like I did.
Yeah, it's very
there's some math going on here.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of math going on under the hood. And there's one thing to define, just columns and rows and be able to have a plain layout, right? We can do that with CSS Grid today, for example. But the idea then to be able to move it around and offer resizing and being able to have some built-in logic for how something moves, depending on how big that unit is, that's definitely pretty complicated. So
what are the flavors that have this? Like,
so currently it is just jQuery because we have received this request quite a lot on the jQuery side, so we wanted to be able to go ahead and implement it. But for anybody on the webinar watching this webinar and the recorded version, if you want to see this in any other flavor, so Angular, React, or Vue, definitely let us know because it's certainly something that could be added into the other libraries as well. But what's nice here, maybe I'll skip the right now just the content, but if we look at the code, you can simply just define that you want to have a particular set of columns and a particular set of rows, right? So how many units you want to be able to have of that. And then you can define just the width and the height of those particular units, right? So how tall do you want the rows to be, or how wide do you want the columns to be? And then from there, this collection that I skipped over, because now it makes a little bit more sense now that we know that for each particular tile layout, you want to be able to define rows and columns and units like that. You can now say, oh, I want a column span of 3 and a row span of 1 for this particular tile, and then have a header, and the template can of course be completely customized. So that can use the Kendo UI templating functionality in order to be able to pass in some HTML and define the KPI that way. So once you've defined the layout, it becomes pretty intuitive for how you define each individual tile. And then beyond that, honestly, the component just takes care of a lot of the different functionality that it has baked in by itself, which is nice.
So there's been a couple of questions around resizing, one with resizing metrics within the tile layout and one with resizing items, just any item in the tile layout. Yeah, can you address resizing?
Yeah, so resizing can definitely work. You can see here, hopefully it comes through in the GoToWebinar interface, where it essentially has these kind of steps as you define the different columns. So if I start extracting this again, we can see there's a halfway point, right? Because this is technically a column. So it goes by columns and rows that once they've been defined. So that's easy to kind of snap to that. In terms of defining the overall layout, so then changing the number of columns and the number of rows and the units for that, that's not available within V1, but it is something that, depending on feedback, we can definitely work towards. Initially, we just wanted to cover some of the baseline functionality and see where we can take it from there. So if a lot of folks are looking for not just resizing the individual tiles, but also then resizing the actual whole tile layout component, we can certainly address that in the future version of the component.
Chris says that I'm excited for the tile component. We would like it in Angular as soon as possible. And I'm going to go ahead and second
yeah, some live feedback on the webinar.
that motion.
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah, note to self. I'll take a note of that after the webinar. Of course, do a little +1 for that on the Angular side.
So have you ever, Kyle actually asks for the tile layout, is there a way to save or persist the layout so when the user A logs in, it's their layout instead of the default? So have you looked into that at all?
Yeah, so I have to double check specifically how that can be done just because we don't have a demo of that. If it's not something that's possible today, again, with V1, right, we wanted to just make sure that we can get as much functionality out there, but we still weren't 100% sure, how people were going to use this, but the saving the state is definitely something that's on our mind. And if it's not available today, would be something that we would address pretty quickly in an upcoming release. I just have to.
This is really cool. This is really cool, by the way, Carl. I'm really impressed.
It's a lot of fun to play around with the component. I've been having fun as the component was developed and checking out staging and everything like that.
And Carl, just as a quick time check, we got about 1 minute left in the jQuery section. Just as
1 minute. All right, so let me show the floating labels. That's a big deal, right? We have floating labels in a lot of our input elements, but we also, thanks to needing this in the regular input, we introduced the text box component. So if I pop over into the main demos, we'll be able to see that we have a bunch of different components, of course, that have new or updated next to them, but the text box component is something new, very similar to what you might have seen with like labels, etc., and some of the other flavors, but we had this available as a standalone CSS class, but now we have this as a standalone component, so you don't just have to implement that over existing elements. And then for the grouping of remote data, this is very exciting for us, of course, where now as I expand my groups, you can see the little loading indicator. This is now happening on the server as opposed to the client, which means that for those of you that are loading hundreds of thousands of rows into the data of the grid and then grouping that, you can now get a increased performance boost by not having to load all that data immediately on the client. You can instead handle that on a case-by-case basis as users are expanding the groups. And then one quick last demo on the scheduler side. Vertical grouping and virtualization. So you already saw that, right? But if you have a long day, or this is a week view, right? But just looking at different meeting rooms from different users, you can just continuously scroll without having to deal with any performance implications, so that can remain buttery smooth. All right, so I think maybe I finished 1 minute over, or maybe exactly on time. But that is what we had for the jQuery side. So, for those of you that are with us now, let's switch gears, but it's still going to be Carl. It's still going to be me, but I'm going to cover.
For next time, well, we need a bunch of T-shirts for all of us.
I know.
And, we need to put up a loading screen, and then we come back and we've all switched shirts, and we've got like the different uniforms on.
I like that.
Headbands and like.
I like that a lot. Yeah, I could not have my sessions back to back though, because then the webcam would definitely show me shirtless for a while as I'm struggling to rip off one shirt and put on another. So you might have to space it out a little bit, but I like the idea. I do. All right, so let's jump in and check out what is new for Vue. So for those of you that just joined us, right, we've covered Angular, we covered React, and we just covered jQuery, and now we're covering the Vue components. And something that's a little bit interesting on the Vue side, right, is that we took originally all of our jQuery components and we wrapped around them for Vue as kind of a placeholder for folks that needed Vue today. So a lot of you are already picking up Vue, but wanted to migrate over from jQuery, let's say, over to Vue, or you're brand new Kendo UI users in the Vue space and you wanted to be able to pick up some of the Kendo UI components. We wanted to make it easier by originally kind of wrapping around the library, and that way you had all of our components available. But as a part of this effort, we're also creating native components for Vue built from the ground up. So that's why if you look into our demos, you might see, oh, there's some wrap components and then there's some native components, and you might wonder what the difference is there. And that is the difference. One is wrapped around jQuery, and the other one, the other set of components are built natively from the ground up. So what we're doing is within every release, and you've seen this in the last 2 or 3 releases, is that we are rolling out more and more native components for Vue. So dependency-free components specifically for Vue. We already have the grid in a very stable spot. In fact, we added the footer seller, but footer cell into the grid with this R2 release. But in terms of features and functionality beyond that, it's definitely primed to use in production. V1 is released, so it's a component that's already seen a lot of use. But within R2 2020, we also added the date input component, the calendar component, and the date picker components. These are all native components specifically built for Vue. So let's jump into and just check out the date input, which just by this screenshot looks kind of simple, right? It's just a date input. You provide a date and it has a mask, and that's about it. But I'll cover this in the demo so we can just see how you can interact with this component a little bit more to see why this is exciting to have. We also have the calendar component. And for the calendar, this is an interface you can just add into anywhere within your application, and it looks just like we see here, right? Where you have the ability to showcase a particular month. So here we see April, we see today highlighted. So this screenshot was clearly taken on the 29th of April this year. And the particular day that we have selected is the 14th. So this can be added anywhere within your application, just dropped in to provide just a way for folks to select a single date or even a range of dates if you like to within a particular month. And then kind of combining these two, the date input and the calendar, we also introduced the date picker. So for those of you that don't want to stick a calendar somewhere within your application, have it take up that kind of expensive real estate, depending on how big your application is and just what kind of user experience you're looking at. This now hides the calendar within a date input component that has a little calendar icon next to it. And when you enter the component, either with keyboard navigation or by clicking in there, the calendar will automatically pop up and allow you to be able to select the date in a little bit more of an intuitive way than just typing in with the keyboard. Of course, if you want to offer the ability to do keyboard input as well, the component will adhere to that. So if you change the particular day just using your keyboard and then you open up the calendar, it will automatically reflect that particular day. So it doesn't just have to be the current month or the current day. And we'll see a little bit more what that looks like when I jump over into the demos. And then on the footer cell piece, that is exactly what you see here, right? So this is a small grid, just has four items, but it allows us to be able to quickly highlight what's the min and what's the max, right? So the footer cell, just beyond being a cell that can be displayed underneath each individual column, and this, of course, is true for any grid that's using virtualization. You can always keep the header of a column constantly displayed, as well as a footer as you're scrolling through the content, right, to be able to help you keep track of things. But it also has some just built-in features that you can take a look at for specifically figuring out, min, max, or anything like that, similar to the aggregates functionality, right, that comes with the grid. So let me jump over into the demos, and let me make sure I'm looking at the right one. So I had everything under one particular tab. So let me, or one window, I should say, with a bunch of tabs. So let's take a look at some of our components here. So starting with the data input, right? You can easily define the mask that you might want to have out of the box, right? So you can either have the US-based time of month, day, year. You can have year, month, day. You can have day, month, year, whichever one you're looking for, right, out of the box. And it's very easy to just, in this particular case, just import it, right, using data input. You just define it as data input, and boom, you're off to the races. But as a part of this, I'm just using my keyboard, but we can use keyboard navigation if we want to be able to update things. And you, of course, can't see this because right, you're just looking at numbers changing. What's nice is that I'm actually pressing up and down on the keyboard to be able to increase or decrease the year. So if I accidentally input something wrong, or if I'm just looking to use keyboard navigation, and it's just easier for me to go up or down, I can simply navigate through the component using the left and right keys to be able to highlight the particular slot and then increase or decrease the value. And of course, you might have noticed I'm on the month. So for those of you in Europe and anybody using a same-day format, I apologize for the fact that the month is first here, but we can see that as we hit 12, it immediately cycles over, but then in the day slot, we can see here that it does go up to 31 before it cycles over. And you might have just noticed the one increased, or you can increase or decrease the 1 or the 2 depending on how close you are. So it has a lot of built-in logic. So it's not just providing a mask and saying, hey, this is a date. It follows this format. There's a lot of built-in functionality around handling just how you define those dates and how do you navigate to them. You can even have spin buttons on the side. So instead of what I was doing for keyboard navigation, you might hear me clicking frantically with my mouse as this increases or decreases. So you can do that also with an additional item in the user interface.
Hey, Carl, can you bump up the font size a bit?
Oh, yes, sorry. I thought I'd already zoomed in, but let me continue zooming in here. You can also do incremental steps. So you can say, hey, the year actually increases or decreases in increments of 10, or the day increments or decrements, right? Is that how you pronounce that? I think it is, by 5, or the hour, or sorry, the day can go up by, or sorry, the month, I should say, can go up by 1 or 2, and then the minutes can be 15. So you can see how everything is just defined within the source code here. So you can provide a format, first of all, and then you can also define the steps. And the steps is just a collection or an object, I should say, that has year, day, hour, and minute defined. And then within each individual one, we're just providing a number for what value you want to increase or decrease each individual step for. You can even define things like date limits. So you can have a min or max date that you want to select. So for example, only dates within March 10th of 2020 are valid. So if I try to do 2021, this automatically then becomes invalid because I'm now stepped beyond the date that we defined. So there's, even though initially it looks like a simple component, there's actually a lot under the hood for managing and dealing with how you can manipulate a date, which is nice. Now on the, let me actually pop up the calendar demo. I'll move over that. Sorry, the GoToWebinar interface is taking up some of the tabs here, so maybe I'll save that in case anybody in the Q&A section wants to look into some other demos. But anyways, let's take a look at the calendar. So easy way for us to be able to navigate through and select particular dates. So for example, we have today, right, the 19th. And if you want to highlight, if I go back, for example, to March 2020, but I say, no, actually, I want to go back to today, I can just simply click on the today item there, and it immediately brings me back. I could also do things like, for example, click on the months there to be able to look into different months quicker. Or if I want to look into the year, I can do that. I can look into the decade if I want to as well. So, you know, in 2070, let's say 2071, you know, June 9th, save the day, something's going to happen that day. So there's a lot of flexibility what you can do there. You can even define an initial active view. So if you, for example, and we don't show this in the demo, but if you want to just quickly say, hey, instead of starting on the view with all the different days, start on the year, so that the user has to select the year, then the month, and then the day. So there's a lot of different things you can do there, and also provide similarly a min and max date. So if you want the user to only be able to view, for example, the current month, you can do that. You can even limit it down to a particular range of days within that month, and all the other dates will be disabled, and then you just have the ability to select only those particular days. So there's, again, a lot of flexibility for what you can do within the component. And then kicking over into the date picker, this kind of is a mix and match of the two, right? So you have a date input that I can still navigate through, right? And I can still change the date using a keyboard. But if I then want to say, you know, it's a little bit easier if I actually check what's on the calendar, we can pop that open. And what you might have noticed, right, is it already has the day that I inputted using my keyboard selected. And I can continue to just say, you know what, let's go to today instead. Oh, let me actually click today. And we see now that it popped back and immediately selected that day. And how this opens and closes is also something you can customize. So it has some baked in logic, like I click today. So we already know at 5/19/2020, I don't necessarily need to display that. But if you want to be able to hold off and say, no, actually only move out of the pop-up and hide the pop-up when the user clicks the side of the component or something else happens, you have full control over that. We can also display, and this is something that the calendar component has, but for those of you that find that the week numbers are important, so for example, we're now in the 21st week of the year, you can display that using a single configuration option. So it depends on, I don't know if it's super popular in the States to be able to talk about the different weeks, but I know that in Europe, a lot of folks define, hey, yeah, let's talk about this in the 22nd week, for example. So that makes it a little bit easier to coordinate than just saying a particular day. It can help just define that week. So that, of course, can be displayed right within the component.
I've honestly always wondered about that because it's a feature of every date picker ever. Like you always see week number, and I've never in my life referred to the week number. So
yeah,
maybe it's more of a
really
cultural
interesting
thing.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard anybody in the U.S. talk about needing or talking about a week number, right? But I also know, talking to our European colleagues, and I'm originally from Sweden, so we do a lot of planning, talking about particular weeks, of saying, oh, for example, for vacation, oh, the 25th week, I'm out that week, right? It's easier to be able to talk a little bit about that based on the week number. So while it's not always apparent in terms of why that's available, I like that feature just because it's a little bit more natural for me to at least know what number what week number you're in currently. So there's a lot here, right? You can switch the locale. So if I switch over to Spanish, for example, we see that, first of all, the date switch, right? So we went to 19/5/2020, but then we also see that we have all the different days of the week, the short abbreviation for them, the name of the month. Today has updated, right? So for some of our components, localization is more than just changing the format. They might have some built-in strings that you might want to update, and that can all be handled through just this type of localization. So every component has what we call messages, and those messages can be completely customized. So if you want your own language, if you want Klingon, whatever you might want in there, or if you just aren't happy with today, you might want to, for example, have it say something else in there. You don't have to go in and customize the HTML for that to happen. It's just a simple string that you can provide into the component, and it will automatically pick that up. So it, of course, works with globalization, but it can even be used for example, in the calendar, right, just changing today to something else. Or if you look at the grid, there's a lot of built-in strings there that you can customize just by providing a string as opposed to modifying HTML, which anytime I'm modifying an HTML or something that could just be a quick configuration option, I'd much rather prefer the configuration option. So that's pretty much what I had on the view side of things, but I wanted to leave a little bit of time for everybody to, first of all, do a little bit of a wrap up here on some housekeeping items. So let me see if I can actually get this up and running again. So we should be switching over into my slide deck, and the audience view is kicking over right there. So if you like anything that you saw today, and you're not familiar with any of the other JavaScript flavors, right? So maybe you're focusing on jQuery today, and you might be looking into React, or you're working with React today, and you're looking into Angular, whatever it might be. You can check out everything that we covered today and more information about each of the individual flavors and products at Telerik.com/KendoUI. And I should mention, some of you might be brand new to Kendo UI to begin with. I saw in the beginning when we had some polls that folks were coming from Google searches and signing up for newsletters. So for those of you that are new, welcome, and you can check out everything that we have at this URL. You can also find us chatting not just about what's new. So, for example, everything that we talked about today, it was actually written about by yours truly on Telerik.com/blogs. So there you'll be able to find all the new stuff about R2 2020 and what came out for Angular, React, Vue, everything in a detailed post for each individual flavor, overall post for everything to give you the quick highlights. And of course, throughout the year, between all the releases, we're constantly blogging there. So TJ, Alyssa, myself, and everybody on our developer advocacy team, they're all constantly posting information in there. And we have a lot of our engineering team members and QA team members that also are blogging. So anything related to our components and our products, you'll be able to find on Telerik.com/blogs. So with that being said, I think we have a lot of potentially a lot of additional questions out there. So I just wanted to give us about 10 minutes or so, and it seems like I'm right on time for that, to open the floor up to some more questions. We can maybe handle that here live. So if this is the time that you had for us and you leave us now, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to spend all this time with us, no matter if you stayed for all the different sections or if you just came for one particular section. But for those of you that want to stick around and ask us some questions, you can feel free to type that into the questions box. And I haven't been paying attention to it during my section, so I'll be able to go ahead and pop over to that and see specifically what that looks like. So let me drag some. You won't see when I drag all these interfaces over, except for my face moving around a little bit.
And something I actually forgot to display, I forgot to go back to my slides at the end of my section, was the link to the feedback portal. So yes. I didn't know if you could mention that. Just if you have feature requests, component requests for your particular flavor, that's the best place to put it.
Exactly. So for those of you not familiar with our feedback portal, and it's just easy, it's feedback.telerik.com. That has the feedback portals for all of the Telerik products, not just the Kendo UI ones. But there you can submit your feature. It can also vote on existing features. You can comment on existing features and new components. So if you have any questions, or I shouldn't say questions, if you have any feedback items, I'm looking at the questions box, so that's what came into my head. But yeah, if we missed a component, if we missed a feature that you needed, or you just kind of would say, hey, this would be nice to have, definitely check out the feedback portal, because that does influence a lot of what we do. In fact, almost everything that we came out with this release has been mentioned in some capacity on the public feedback portal. Some of them are essentially top requested features. Some of them might be coming in. It's a public feedback portal, so we get feedback from a lot of different areas. But overall, I think you can tie anything that we created for React, Angular, jQuery, or Vue is directly tied to the feedback portal.
Yeah, so Alexander actually had a question about our docs. He said, I have a quick look at the demos on the website, and there's an overview added to many components. It wants to know what overview means. What do you find in that?
So that, I think, you can see that in actually a lot of our different flavors. But the overview, the intention behind that is to be able to create some more complex scenarios, essentially, beyond just saying, hey, here's a basic grid with like some data and columns bound to it, right? Maybe showcase a little bit more of the power of the component. So, filtering enabled, grouping enabled out of the box, frozen columns, templates on those columns, right? So it's essentially just intended to show off the component a little bit more and maybe show off an advanced scenario as opposed to like a basic usage demo. So you might actually see overview and basic usage listed under each of those components. So the overview is just simply there to provide a little bit more, showcase of the component, where the basic usage would be like the very basic, okay, this is the bare minimum that you need to start working with a component.
Awesome. We had another question concerning React. Would it be possible to share those examples where custom items were used to change the original component? TJ, was that your Acme app that they're referring to?
Yeah, I can drop the link is, it's going to be github.com/tjvantol/acme, and I'll reply to the person directly so that they have it. And I think in general, when it comes to custom components in React, really that's used throughout the entire library. So even though I use them in my examples, it's sort of a pattern that we use throughout the entire library for anytime you want to customize a little chunk of the UI. React, at least, I think is quite good at this of saying, I'm just going to pass back like a chunk of JSX here and allow you to do something custom with it. So you'll see that throughout, like we showed today, like the scheduler and the header and the footer follows that sort of pattern, or the grid for like the filter section for providing checkbox filters, and the drawer in terms of how do you render each item in the drawer. So I'll share the example, but really it's kind of a pattern that we try to follow throughout the entire library.
Yeah, you see that a lot where if we don't allow a custom renderer initially with the initial version, we tend to add that in the subsequent update to be able to allow you to expand on that. Very similar to how a lot of things on the Angular side can use an ng template, for example, to be able to customize the layout, right? And on the jQuery side, we have the jQuery Kendo UI template structure, like you saw in the tile layout component. So yeah, we try to just adhere to whatever's kind of a standard within each individual framework. And on the React side, it's a custom renderer.
Yeah, it's one thing I like about just Kendo UI in general, because I don't know about you two, but have you ever been in this scenario where you had to use a UI thing and you didn't have control over something that you needed to change, and you bust out like the worst of the worst JavaScript, right? It's like, oh my God.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I have to wait till this thing is rendered. Then I have to traverse this proprietary DOM structure, and it's gonna get like,
yeah. There's a lot of ugly jQuery selectors back in the day that could potentially lead to flickering on the page because I didn't have access to the source code of the component that I was using, or just really didn't want to go in and customize the source code. You know, I just wanted to tweak something. Yeah, so a lot of interesting ways to try to avoid traversing, but maybe I still had to, and hope that the user didn't scroll down as the flicker happened.
You set the trick is you set the opacity to 0, and then you get messy with the DOM, and then you fade it in. When
you're smarter than I am. Yeah. That's I need to go back a bunch of years to when I was doing a lot of these hacky things before I started using our components. Oh, so actually, I'm going through and I'm seeing some questions, and somebody, of course, asked about if we can save a persistent layout of the tile layout, and I said I didn't know, but we actually have an answer to that, and we have a get options and set options within the tile layout. So that's on the API side of things. So if you're not familiar on the jQuery side, generally we have these get option, set option methods that help maintain state, so that you can save and persist. So thanks to all of our helpers. I see that almost all the questions that people asked and typed in have been responded to, at least by someone chatting back to them. So that helps out quite a lot, of course, to make sure everybody is well taken care of. One question that I know came over from Twitter, and I did also see posted here, is if we're thinking about introducing a Fluent theme to Kendo UI. So for some background, right, for everybody here, so everything we covered today, even though they are different technologies that are built from the ground up for each one of those individual flavors, as I like to call them, they do still share rendering in the sense of a Kendo UI theme that you customize for, let's say, jQuery, can then be copied and pasted into an Angular application, into a React application, into a Vue application, and it can be used there by those components without you having to customize it further. So right now we have our own default design language. Essentially, we call it default, so that's the name of it. It's great. And then we have a Bootstrap compatible theme as well as a Material Design compatible theme that follows the best practices and the guidelines within those. Fluent definitely is not outside of the question. We don't have, I can't say specifically right now when or if we would have it, but it is definitely on our minds for one of the potential design languages for us to implement beyond what we currently have. Of course, we have a lot of components, so introducing a new theme is not something that we can necessarily do, just by flicking our magic wand and have it be done. So it does take a little while to get there. But generally, if you've seen in the past, we'll probably come out in a kind of a capacity of certain components as we slowly build out the theme. So if we were to introduce that, it probably would be in various stages. But if you are looking for a Fluent theme, I believe that almost every one of our feedback portals for each of the individual products happens to have a Fluent theme item, I believe. If not, you can of course create it if you need it specifically for Angular, specifically for React, and ensure that you and your colleagues and anybody else that might need it is voting on it and commenting on it, so we can raise the priority there.
Someone said that they prefer to go with the jQuery flavor for reasons. Please don't kill jQuery. So I don't think they're in danger.
Yeah, there's definitely, of course, highlighting everything in one webinar, right? We see a lot of different components get introduced in different in the different products. So I've answered a lot of questions during the session that we've had here around people asking, how do you say what feature makes it into what library, or how do you say what is going to be like the stepper? We saw that in a lot of the different flavors today, right? How do you decide that? And also some people wondering, what is the future of one library, and how do we prioritize between the libraries, right? And I've said this in previous webinars, but I think it's worth reiterating. All of these different flavors of Kendo UI that we have here, they actually all have dedicated teams. And what that means is that we don't necessarily have to sacrifice a feature in one library to fit in the next, for example, right? So it gives us the flexibility of being able to say, hey, from the React side, we have this feedback, and that's why we implemented this component. On the jQuery side, we have this a couple pieces of feedback that this is why we have this feature in that new component. And sometimes we just look at it and say, hey, the stepper component leads to the wizard component, and both the stepper and the wizard have been requested, so why don't we build that out across all the flavors that we can in order to be able to offer that. So we have no plans to replace or take over one technology over the other. It's just that they're all in different states of maturity, right? jQuery has been around for the longest, so we might see some new interesting components there, or some components that take a little bit longer to build and get introduced there. And then the Angular suite is a little bit older than the React suite, so you might see some unique components there. React might have some unique components just based on the feedback of the customers that we have on the React side. And then, on the Vue side, we're slowly but surely building that out as more people are picking up Vue as a framework, and that's why you see a lot of these kind of building blocks and foundational elements like the data input date picker. We saw a couple of items like the animation framework and a pop-up and a couple of others in the previous release. So these are all built to some larger components as well. So it's a long response there, but I just want to make sure that don't just look at things and say, hey, there were 10 components released here, 8 components here, and 3 here. That means that the one that received 3 is out of the water. It is 100% just based on the level of maturity and kind of what we can do for each of the individual frameworks.
You're only going to find jQuery love, at least on this panel. I still love me some jQuery syntax. Like I actually, like when you brought up the examples, I was just like, part of me is just loves the simplicity of the APIs. And it's just, if that's the tool that works for you.
There's so many times I'll quickly create a demo and I'll throw in some jQuery and I get so much flack. People are like, why are you using jQuery? And I'm like, because it works. I don't know. So
yeah, it's probably the quickest. If I were to prototype out something, it'd be the quickest thing I can prototype out an application with. And actually, I've seen several influencers within the Vue, React, and Angular community all say, hey, I used some jQuery today and it felt great. So I know that it gets lost in a lot of the hype over frameworks, but I think a lot of people also realize that, you know, chasing the new shiny thing isn't always the best thing to do, and jQuery still is strong, and it still happens to be one of my favorite ways to develop in JavaScript.
And that might be a good way to wrap up, because it's looked like we're at time here.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we're 1 minute over, and I actually saw a lot of people comment that they were here for the entire thing. So
yeah,
definitely
thanks for hanging out and staying with us through all the flavors. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, so yeah, so let's wrap things up. So thank you everybody for taking the time today and spending some time with us. As we mentioned, everything that we talked about today is already publicly available on the website, right? So you can check out all the new demos, all the new what's new pages, everything like that. If you have any feedback on things we missed, things you want to see in the libraries, we have the feedback portals. This will be recorded. We'll be posting this on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to check that out. And that's it from the three of us and all the people that we have behind the scenes. I definitely want to thank them as well for being able to ensure that we can continue to talk and showcase our everything that we've planned, and then while still being able to answer all your questions. So a special shout out to the crew that we have helping out. And yeah, take it easy, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day, your evening, whatever it might be, depending on your time zone. We appreciate it very much, and see you at the next release.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.